The screaming stopped, not because the killing had ended. Almost no one was left alive to scream. The year is 216 BC. Nearly 80,000 Roman soldiers stand crushed together in a shrinking ring of dust and blood. You cannot breathe. You cannot lift your arm. The men beside you are dying on their feet, held upright by the crowd. This was the largest army Rome had ever assembled. In one afternoon, it was being erased from the earth. Somewhere beyond the dust, a Carthaginian general watches in silence. He built this trap, and he built it from Roman pride. His name is Hannibal. What happens today at Cannae will be studied by generals for the next 2,000 years. But for the men trapped inside this circle, history means nothing. There is only the next breath and the blade that ends it. To understand how this army walked into a slaughter, we go back 3 days to before the horror began. Rome had already lost twice to this Carthaginian invader. This time, the Senate demanded something different. Overwhelming force, not clever tactics. Most people assume the Roman dead at Cannae fell fighting. Ancient accounts suggest otherwise. Many never even managed to swing a sword. 2 consuls were given joint command: Paulus, cautious and battle-scarred, and Varro, ambitious and certain that numbers alone would win. Nearly 86,000 men, by Polybius's count, marched south into Apulia. Never had Rome fielded an army of this size. Across the plain waited Hannibal, outnumbered, far from home, with no reinforcements coming. By every rule of war, he should lose. What happened next would be studied in military academies for the next 23 centuries. And it began with a single, fatal decision. Imagine one soldier among the ranks, a young farmer, newly conscripted, marching beside his older brother, holding a sword for the first time. It's a small human detail, not a documented fact, but soldiers like him made up most of Rome's ranks. Somewhere behind him, his family's harvest waited. Command rotated daily between the 2 consuls. Today, command belonged to Varro, the one eager to attack immediately. Paulus argued against it. The ground was too open, too flat, favoring Hannibal's cavalry. Varro overruled him. The army would fight here. On a low rise across the field, Hannibal studied the Roman formation. He had fought Rome 3 times. He knew their instincts. His army was a patchwork. Gauls, Spaniards, Numidians, African veterans. Many did not share a language. All shared loyalty to one man. Hannibal had already chosen his shape for the battle. Not a wall, a trap disguised as weakness. Thin center, strong wings. At dawn, the Roman war horn sounded, a noise that had shattered lesser armies before. The men stepped forward as one. Somewhere in the ranks, hands shook. Shields were gripped tighter. The ground trembled under thousands of hobnailed boots. Hannibal's center, Gauls and Spaniards, stood in a shallow crescent curving outward toward the Romans. It looked fragile. It was meant to. The Roman infantry crashed into that thin center. Almost immediately, the Carthaginian line began to bend backward, step by step. "We are winning." The thought spread through the Roman ranks like a spark as the enemy line kept giving ground before them. From his rise, Hannibal watched without expression. This was exactly the shape he had built the battle to take. The Romans pushed forward, believing the enemy was breaking. They did not know a retreating enemy can also be a trap. An enemy line does not fall back this evenly by accident, but packed shoulder to shoulder. Few Romans could see far enough to notice. On the flanks, Hannibal's Numidian cavalry, famously fast and lightly armed, struck the Roman horsemen, outmaneuvering them within minutes. The Roman cavalry, weaker and boxed against the riverbank, broke and fled the field. The Roman flanks were now completely open. Hannibal raised his hand. A single signal, and his African infantry, held in reserve, began to move. The crescent had now bowed so far inward that the Roman mass was no longer advancing into open ground. It was advancing into a pocket. Something feels wrong. The whisper moved through the crush. The advance had slowed, though no one near the front could say why. How does an army of 80,000 simply disappear? The answer begins here, in the mathematics of a closing circle. Behind the front ranks, tens of thousands of men still pushed forward, unaware that the soldiers ahead of them were already surrounded. In a formation this dense, word could not travel backward fast enough. The rear of the army had no idea what was happening at the front. Retreat was no longer a choice. Packed shoulder to shoulder, you could not turn, could not run. could barely raise your arm. Hannibal watched his African veterans begin to turn. He did not celebrate. He simply watched the plan unfold exactly as drawn. The trap was seconds from closing. And still, the men at the rear kept pushing forward into a battle they could not see. Then, on both flanks, Hannibal's African infantry turned inward, marching directly into the exposed, unshielded sides of the Roman column. At the same moment, the Carthaginian cavalry that had crushed the Roman horsemen wheeled around and struck the Roman rear. The circle closed completely. Tens of thousands of Roman infantry were now trapped inside the tightening ring. There is no escape. The certainty moved through the crush like cold water. Soldiers could barely tell friend from enemy anymore. A Roman legionary normally needed enough room to swing his sword. Inside the encirclement, many had only inches. Panic spreads faster than any blade. You cannot see the enemy, cannot swing your weapon, cannot retreat. All you can do is scream. The Romans were no longer losing a battle. They had become prisoners inside their own army. Along the outer edge of the circle, Carthaginian soldiers began a grim, mechanical work. No longer a battle, but a methodical slaughter. Men in the middle of the crush suffocated standing up, held vertical only by the density of bodies pressed against them. A soldier dropped his shield to catch his breath. He bent to retrieve it. He did not rise again. The crowd swallowed him. Somewhere in the crush, the young farmer reached back for his brother's hand. For a moment, he held it. Then the crowd tore them apart. Consul Palus, already wounded, was offered a horse to escape. Roman historians write that he refused it, choosing to stay with his men. Consul Varro, on the collapsing edge of the line, escaped with a small cavalry detachment, one of the battle's few surviving officers. Hannibal rode slowly along his lines, watching the encirclement tighten as his officers relayed reports from every flank. Hours passed. The African sun did not relent. According to ancient accounts, some men died of thirst before a blade ever reached them. Sword arms, pinned uselessly against chests, could no longer be raised. Standing upright had become its own kind of execution. By late afternoon, the outer ring of the Roman formation had been almost entirely destroyed. The circle kept shrinking toward its center. The sun began to set. Dust turned the fading light deep red. For a moment, only wind and the scrape of settling armor. As darkness fell, scattered killing continued while many wounded Romans remained trapped beneath the dead. Hannibal stood apart from his own men as the sun dropped. Ancient writers describe even his officers falling silent as they surveyed the battlefield. As dusk fell, the killing finally slowed. Hannibal's soldiers withdrew to their camps, leaving the field to the dying and the dead. For a moment, in the darkness, it seemed the horror might be over. It was not. The night would bring a different suffering. Beneath mountains of fallen men, thousands of wounded Romans lay trapped, pinned by the dead, unable to move, unable to call for help. The night filled with a low, endless sound. Men slowly dying beneath the weight of comrades who had fallen on top of them. According to Roman accounts, one wounded soldier was later found having buried his own face in the dirt to end his suffering. Morning came, and with it, the true scale of the disaster became visible for the first time, stretching toward the horizon. Ancient historians describe a battlefield carpeted with the dead as far as the eye could see. Tens of thousands of fallen Romans. Among the dead lay around 80 members of the Roman Senate, a significant portion of Rome's governing body, gone in a single day. Hannibal walked the battlefield afterward. Even his own hardened officers, ancient sources say, fell silent at the scale of what they saw. Hannibal's men gathered golden rings from the hands of fallen Roman nobles, the mark of the equestrian class. Filling sacks with them, these rings would be sent back to Carthage as undeniable proof of victory, a grim, glittering receipt of Rome's shattered army. Yet Hannibal never marched on Rome itself. For a moment, it seemed the city might fall, and still, he chose not to take it. Historians still argue why. Some say caution, some say logistics. Ancient sources never fully agree, and the debate continues today. News of the disaster reached Rome within days. According to Livy, the grief was too immense for public wailing. The city went silent. The Senate took the unprecedented step of banning public mourning. Rome, gripped by fear, could not afford collective despair. In their terror, Livy writes, the Romans turned to a grim ritual, burying 2 pairs of foreigners alive in the city's cattle market, hoping to appease the gods. Consul Varro, one of the architects of the defeat, returned to Rome expecting condemnation. Instead, the Senate publicly thanked him for not giving up hope. The survivors of Cannae fared worse. Several thousand soldiers who fled the field were gathered into disgraced legions. Rome refused to disband them, but refused to forgive them either. They were exiled to Sicily, barred from return until the war ended. For years, these men, the legiones cannenses, served far from home, carrying the shame of survival like a wound that never healed. Among the survivors was a young officer who would remember every detail of Hannibal's trap for the rest of his life. His name was Publius Cornelius Scipio. Years later, he would use what he learned at Cannae against Hannibal himself. That reckoning was 14 years away. For now, Rome simply endured, refusing to negotiate, refusing to surrender, refusing to break. Historians still debate the exact death toll at Cannae. Polybius records nearly 70,000. Livy suggests closer to 50,000. No two ancient accounts fully agree. Whatever the precise number, historians broadly agree on this. Few single days of battle in the ancient world claimed more Roman lives. Hannibal had achieved something almost no general ever would: a full double envelopment of a numerically superior enemy, using speed and deception instead of numbers. Military academies still teach the Battle of Cannae today, over 2,000 years later, as a foundational model of tactical encirclement. They teach it with clean diagrams, arrows curving neatly across a map, careful bloodless lines standing in for tens of thousands of lives. What the diagrams cannot teach you is the sound of an army realizing all at once that there was no way out, nor the weight of a friend's hand held for a moment, then lost forever in the crush. Rome would not fall that year or the next. Slowly, painfully, it rebuilt its armies and refused again and again to ask for peace. 14 years later at Zama, the young officer who survived Cannae would finally defeat Hannibal, using lessons paid for in blood. History remembers more than Hannibal's victory. It remembers that Rome learned, at unbearable cost, how never to be broken like this again. On the fields of Cannae, Rome lost an army. It found the resolve that would one day defeat Hannibal and eventually dominate the Mediterranean.